So it's nearly 11 o'clock at night my time here on Thursday night on January 9th, and I was just wrapping up recording a video about another move that's taking place in the roster mania here at the beginning of 2025 when FaZe hits us late at night with the official announcement that EliGE has been added to the team. And so I had to kind of push that other video to the side. It'll be coming out soon about Gamer Legion and focus in on this new news about FaZe because this is a big one. Now, of course, it's not shocking. You know, we've been kind of hearing the rumors and rumblings that EliGE was going to be going to FaZe for quite some time now. It's also been known for quite some time that ropz was on his way out and likely headed to Vitality to fill in the vacancy left behind by Spinks. And that may have officially been announced already by the time I released this video. So it is what it is. You know, I can only do so much as far as getting the timings right in that regard. And of course, ropz's reasoning for leaving the team had to do with earlier situations in 2024 where he felt like the team needed more firepower, but they didn't have the budget to go out there and get it. And so ropz felt like he was kind of stuck on a team that was stagnant, which of course FaZe were certainly struggling at different points throughout the course of this year. And so this kind of wraps up the whole storyline. EliGE will now be joining the squad. There's been no indication of any other moves being made, so it looks like we will be seeing the veterans of Kerrigan and Rain rotting again alongside Frozen and Broky to now make this new 5 with EliGE. And so I wanted to start this video talking a little bit about FaZe in 2024. And they had a really strong start to the year. Second at Katowice, second at the Copenhagen Major, the first CS2 Major. Winning IEM Chengdu, but then they started to have a slow decline after that. You know, EPL season 19, they dropped down to a top 8 finish after making grand finals the 3 tournaments prior to that. They get knocked out by Vitality, but had wins, you know, over Navi and Eternal Fire and Virtus Pro and so on. So it wasn't too bad, you know, losing to Vitality in the quarterfinals. Fair enough. Vitality was one of the most consistent teams of 2024. Yeah, they only had the one win at Cologne, but I mean, if you just look at the overall consistency, really the only team that rivaled them was Navi. Then you go to IEM Dallas, and they wound up losing to both Spirit and G2 to finish in 5th, 6th place. Again, not too shabby. They're kind of losing to fellow top 5 teams in the world at this point, or teams that are on their way up into the top 5, and so you really don't think too much of that one either. It was still a decent placement. And then you had the Blast Spring Finals, where again they placed 5th, 6th after beating Saul, which was kind of on the come up with Erados and E-Jerks before they decided to remove those 2 players prior to the Shanghai Major in a bizarre fashion. They wound up losing 2 tight series to Navi and Vitality. And of course, this was when Navi was on their upswing. You know, they had obviously won the Copenhagen Major. They had a couple of, you know, duds after that, but then they started going on that 6 finals in a row run, and this was kind of a part of them. Then, of course, they lost to Vitality as well in this one also in 1-2. So, again, the 2 most consistent teams in the world at the time. Again, really no reason to be too concerned. But then IEM Cologne happens. And not only do they lose to Vitality, which was fair enough, but they wound up getting beat by Saul. Now, of course, it's a team that they had beat at the Blast Spring Finals in 2-0 fashion. Yeah, there was some overtimes involved in that, but this was the first time we really saw them lose to a team ranked outside the top 5, and we really saw that 5th, 6th place finish look a little bit less forgivable considering the opposition they lost against. And then you go into EPL Season 20, and the bottom falls out. For the first time, they finish outside the top 8 for the entire year. They finished in 13th to 16th place. This is after losing series to Sangal. They do beat FlyQuest Nip and get revenge against Sangal, but then they get knocked out by Complexity. Kind of a funny story as it comes full circle. EliGE, the man who knocked them out to help Complexity onto a decent finish there, is coming over. And then after that, we saw the Blast Fall Final. Again, they were kind of back to losing to the top 5 teams, G2 and Navi, so just the top 4 finish there. Rio, top 8, losing to Mouse Sports in the quarterfinals there. Then you go to the Blast World Final. They actually get a win over Navi finally, so finally a W on the board, but ultimately still lost to Mouse and Spirit to fall into another 5th, 6th position. So when you think about it, it was one of those situations where they just kind of got beaten out of the top 5 because they just couldn't get any wins. They were consistently losing the Vitality. They were consistently losing the G2. They were losing at times to Navi. They were losing to Mouse Sports, losing to Spirit. But they finally got that win over Navi at the Blast World Final to kind of get them a win over a top 5 team. And they made up for, you know, the whole losing to Saul and Sangal kind of earlier on, right? But then we have the Perfect World Shanghai Major. And in the European RMR, they kind of blitzed through it, right? I mean, they beat Cloud9, they beat Falcons, they lost to Vitality, sure, but then they beat Fnatic, and then they won that game we're going to have to forget about now against Cloud9 because it didn't matter, and they wound up going straight to the elimination stage of the Major. Once there, they pretty quickly took care of business. They won their best of 1 against Wildcard, lost to Heroic, but then beat Mousesports. After going 0-2 against G2, they were then able to get the win over Furia to make it to the playoffs. So not too much of a struggle to make it to the playoffs. And then they go on this crazy freaking miracle run in the playoffs where they beat Vitality 2-1, they beat G2 2-0, and then they take Spirit to 3 maps, and in the 3rd map on DusT 2, they very nearly brought that into overtime and gave us one of the most crazy grand finals that you could have ever anticipated from a FaZe team that was wallowing through a lot of the year to now all of a sudden at a major again, return to brilliant form. And this is with all sorts of extenuating circumstances taking place outside the server. Obviously situations with different people and their family members. I believe ropz had a tragedy happen in his family. Kerrigan had a tragedy happen in his family. And so they were dealing with so much outside the server. They were dealing with the pressure of not having a great year. Players were having rough individual performances at times throughout the course of the year. But we had everyone show up here. I mean, Rain was exquisite throughout the RMR and through most of the major, particularly in his entry stats, but just in general put up big numbers throughout the RMR and kind of some of the group stage major games and was fine in playoffs. You know, Frozen was himself, stayed consistent. Broky came alive after being in a slump in the playoffs. He was revitalized, no pun intended, as they beat Vitality in G2, looked like himself again. And then ropz was absolutely fucking bonkers at this event. If they would have beaten Spirit in the finals, he would have been an MVP candidate for sure. I mean, the dude was playing out of his fucking mind, and he was also being more active. You know, normally a lurker, an extremity player, this dude was going for opening kills on Nuke on the upper bomb site. This guy was going for opening kills on the extremities of Anubis. This guy was trying to make shit happen, you know, in some of these big games to get this team over the line, you know, and it's obviously playing defensively quite well. Just absolutely phenomenal stuff from FaZe. And it really made you start to second guess yourself, because I think a lot of people prior to the major were thinking to themselves, oh, maybe it's time for Kerrigan to retire. Maybe it's time for Rain to retire. Maybe broky has finally hit the wall after having such a strong, you know, first few lands of the year. And he ultimately wound up becoming a top 20 player this year, and deservedly so. You know, he was kind of having some struggles in form. Like, did FaZe need changes? Did they need to shake things up? You know, this was a lot of the things that were swirling around. But once they had this finish at the major, you still felt like there probably needed to be some shifting of personnel. But the ropz leaving was definitely not the one that you would have expected. You want to keep that guy, right? I mean, he was so good for this team. You'd love to keep him as a part of it, right? You were probably still thinking, hey, maybe we still need to replace Rain despite him having this resurgence at Shanghai. You know, maybe we need to tinker around with other things. But they ultimately decide to go with bringing in EliGE for ropz. Now, they kind of talk a little bit about, you know, player performance coming into this. Again, ropz had been the most consistent player on the team for me for the year. He may not have been the same star he was in the middle of the year as he was at the start and at the finish, but he got back to a high level at EPL Season 20 and throughout the rest of their events for the year, and he was massive in Shanghai. You know, again, going for openings, you know, going for entry frags, like just crazy stuff. Dude was wild. Frozen was solid for the majority of the year in his role. I don't really have any complaints there. Can't say much. Had some really big events when they came second at Katowice in the Copenhagen Major, as well as when they won Chengdu. Was also really good for them at EPL Season 20. Played well enough for them at Shanghai, I thought, for his role. Kind of got outshined by ropz and Rain, and then even broky in the playoffs, just because they were having these crazy resurgences in form. But you couldn't really complain about Frozen. He was also a top 20 player this year, and deservedly so. Then broky, again, really damn good the first 5 to 6 lands of the year, but then struggled in the middle of the year, for honest. Really up until EPL Season 20, where he finally played pretty well there. Also did pretty well at the Blast Fall Finals before the Major. Didn't really play that well at the RMR and the Major itself up until he came alive when they needed him most in the playoffs against, you know, Vitality, G2, and Spirit. And then Rain was really average for me through a lot of the year. He'd have occasional pop-off maps in series, but he also had some big struggles the events leading up to the Major. But yeah, again, incredible in Shanghai. And I will say, even when he looked average, he still managed to have a pretty good success rate in opening duels on the T side and still be a pretty valid entry fragger. He wasn't, by any stretch of the imagination, a top entry fragger like a Donk, a Xantares, an EliGE, a Senzu, a Flames, or even Xerxin. He wasn't up to that level, but he was still performing well enough for this team to operate, in my opinion. So fair enough in that regard. But now, and obviously it goes without saying that Kerrigan's not going to be known for much of a fragger. He'll have the occasional pop-off map, but he's mostly known for being a tactician, one of the best IGLs in the world, keeping you guessing in pick-ban situations all the time, having a really well-rounded map pool. I mean, this team was fantastic on Ancient. They were very good on Inferno. They were quite good on Mirage. At times, they were quite strong on Nuke. They were capable of playing Vertigo, that they didn't have to do it much. They would often ban it, but they played it just enough to force other teams to ban it against them so they could kind of stretch their ban out a little bit. Really, their only discrepancies, in my opinion, were their Anubis really kind of slowed down at a certain point. They had such a slow start on it, though, that they really did kind of bring it back around towards the latter half of the year. Their DusT 2 did kind of drop off a little bit, and, just throughout the middle of the year, some of their maps started to kind of fall off, but they were still really well-rounded. Again, very good at working from default into mid-round plays, very good at the pacing changes, very good at set pieces, executes. There was different points in time throughout the course of the year where Kerrigan would give players a little bit more individual freedom, and he would try to play a looser style, and then just kind of come together in the in-round. But then there were times where he was more focused on micromanaging players, really kind of controlling the early to mid-round a little bit more, and kind of just trying to call the shots and really kind of be the leading voice of the team that everyone kind of followed. And, I think a lot of that was probably just because they were having shaky results, and so they were trying to figure out how to turn things around. And so experimenting with how structured or how loose you are as a team strategically makes a lot of sense, right? So we're not going to get into that too much. I think it is what it is. At their highest points, they played some of the best Counter-Strike you'll ever watch. At their lowest points, they struggled against some of the top teams. What they did do was just beat the bricks off of Team Liquid every single time, and they were the gatekeepers of the top 5 at that point. They weren't really top 5 themselves, but they're like 6th, 7th, But they always kind of hovered around that position for the most part, in my opinion. But let's talk about who they're bringing in. It's your boy EliGE. This guy has been a true star rifler for North America for many years, pretty much dating all the way back to 2016 with Team Liquid. He was pretty much a star rifler from that point forward at all times. There were times where maybe you would put Twist or NAF ahead of him in overall performance, but EliGE was always one of their best players. EliGE at times has been considered the best North American player ever. Again, Twist has been in that argument as well. So, you can go a couple different ways with that, but we all know that this guy is a huge star, right? He's obviously a big star for Complexity from, 2023 up until now when he leaves the team. He was a big part of any success that team had, when they had that second place finish at IM Sydney in 2023, or the top 4 at EPL season 19, or winning Challengers Young Chirping. This guy was the one leading them forward, and he was also trying to carry this team through their struggles. Yes, we can point to maybe he was a part of some of the flaws they had in their mid-round decision-making, and when they got shaky and stressed out, maybe he, also played a part in Complexity's failures, but he was also their best player by far, and one of the main reasons why they had a shot to win a lot of the time. Like, sure, Grimm came around the second half of the year, it really improved and became an asset. Hallzerk at times could be an asset. I thought their overall early round and in-round plans were good. It's just their mid-round protocols that sometimes fail them. They sometimes choke in big moments. When things got hectic or stressful, they'd sometimes crumble. But all in all, EliGE was the man on that team. Just to kind of really set it for you, he had a 27% opening attempt rate on the T side as a guy who played a lot of active map roles and entry roles, and had a 53% success rate on LAN for 2024. That's unreal. He won more than half of the opening attempts he took on T side. The only other players in the 50-plus range are Donk, Xantares, and Malbs as far as entry riflers go. So EliGE is like right up there with just behind Donk. Donk's obviously the best player in the world, but he's comparable to Xantares and Malbs as far as entry efficiency. He's right there with him. And then after that, you have Nico, who wasn't a pure entry rifler, but definitely was over 50% for the year in opening attempts. Then you have Ziwu, who obviously was taking way less opening attempts and was more of a hybrid player. I think the only other riflers I'd compare them would be like Senzu. Senzu was an aggressive rifler for Mongols that was over 50% success rate through a lot of 2024. So you can put him in that same company. But then the others like JL, Bit, and K Serato are more extremity players that could be playmakers. And so they would at times do it. But this guy was ahead of Flame, Zershin, Ema, and your other traditional entry fraggers by far as entry stats go. Again, this really now comes down to what is EliGE going to be for FaZe. This is a tough one. Because obviously on Complexity, he was their star and got all the star spots and was an aggressive rifler, so he played all the forward positions. So, on Ancient, he was a guy who would either default middle and help fight for mid control, or he was a part of the main entry group, whether it was like first, second, or third in, whatever you wanted to call it. He was the guy really trying to crack open that bomb site. Anubis, he was a guy who played canals, really helped entry whenever they would split B through B connector, or helped entry through A when they were going for A set pieces. He was always very active. DusT, same exact thing. He was a part of the main control group at middle and catwalk and, mid to B and all that jazz. And then on Inferno, he was like their mid boiler player, and again, a guy who would be a part of the B executes as a trader and just play those more active positions. And the problem with this is that this conflicts with Rain a ton. Pretty much and then on Ancient, it conflicts with Frozen. Frozen was the mid player on Ancient for FaZe through all the year. ropz would kind of assist him. So in a sense, you could maybe just pair up, Frozen and EliGE together at middle and Ancient, and you'd be kind of fine and keep everything else the same. But on Anubis, he played Rain's role. DusT, he plays Rain's role. And on Inferno, he plays Rain's role. So that's really tough. Then on the CT side, he was the mid player on Ancient. That's the spot that Frozen plays. On Anubis, he was the mid player. That's the spot that Kerrigan plays. DusT, he's an A rotator. That was Rain's spot. And then Inferno is an A rotator, which is Rain's spot. Because ropz is leaving behind all the extremity roles and anchor positions. He was the A guy that assisted Frozen at middle on T-side Ancient. He was a lurk on Anubis. He was a B lurk on DusT, and he was the apartments player on Inferno. He was also an A anchor on Ancient, an A anchor on Anubis, a B anchor on DusT, and an A anchor on Inferno, whereas, again, EliGE played a lot of rotating positions. Now, I didn't include Mirage because Complexity banned Mirage, so there's really no point in talking about that from the FaZe perspective, and Vertigo's out the map pool now, so there's really no point in talking about that either. So I kind of just focused on those 4 maps. And so this is now leading to the big question that you have to ask yourself, because everyone's so excited about FaZe getting EliGE because EliGE is such a superstar and he brings so much firepower to this team. But you have to start asking the other questions about how this move will play out. We know that EliGE is willing to play new roles. He has said that. That was a part of him also saying he was willing to go to Europe finally and leave North America to have a chance to win. So, in theory, he could take all of ropz's roles and just try to be a completely different player. It could happen, right? I mean, I think EliGE is talented enough and he's a workaholic enough to make that work. Like, this guy is such a student of the game. He puts in so much time practicing, looking at film, working on mechanics. Go watch the interview that DDK did with James IRL whenever James was actually working with Complexity as like an assistant coach, I believe it was. And he talks about how apparently EliGE had hired someone to watch back his demos and look at how he died every round and tell him, how did he die? Did he over fix his aim? Did he under fix his aim? Did he get shot in the back, the side? Was it a timing issue? Was it an aim issue? Like, this dude is ridiculous when it comes to his dedication to understanding the game. So when you have a guy like that is that dedicated, he could indeed pivot to a whole new role and just take over ropz's positions and be a playmaker on the extremities. Try to be like a Bit or a JL type character, like Navi has. Try to be that guy. Maybe even bigger, like, you know what I mean? Just like straight up go for it kind of thing. Like that could work. But I think if we're being really honest, the ideal role for EliGE would either to be play Rain spots on the T side and also some on the CT side, or he would be a guy that you'd want trading behind Kerrigan and Rain, like a second guy in behind Kerrigan and Rain, because Kerrigan and Rain go for the most opening tips on this team by far. Like, they were both like in the high 20% range for the majority of the year. Frozen was always more of a second or third guy in type of figure. Obviously, broky was the opper, and then ropz was an extremity player who was generally passive throughout most of the year, but popped off at the end at Shanghai where he'd go for more plays. So, the ideal role for EliGE would be to either just take Rain's role on T side So do you do that? Do you force Rain to be more of an extremity player and let EliGE take his spots, basically, on T side? Again, the only spot that he doesn't, where he wouldn't play Rain's role on T side would be Ancient. Everything else, he plays the spot that Rain plays. So do you do that and move Rain? Or do you put him in a situation where he trades behind Kerrigan and Rain? Because the problem with that is that's what Frozen does. Yeah, Frozen plays some extremities. You know, like he'll be like a long A guy on DusT 2, for example. Or he'll be like the solo mid player on Ancient. You know, I think he played outside B somewhat on Anubis. But at the same time, he was the guy that was mostly trade fragging behind Kerrigan. Like, that was kind of the thing. Like, Kerrigan was going in as like a sacrificial entry to set Frozen up a lot of the time in their executes and set pieces. So you don't want to strip Frozen from that, probably. But that's probably the second ideal spot for EliGE if he's not going to play Rain's roles. So what do you do here? You know what I mean? Like, are you going to move Frozen around to you know, get EliGE what he wants and needs to succeed? Do you move Rain around to do it? Or do you let EliGE just take ropz' roles? You know, like, I don't know how you do it. Maybe you have to experiment. Maybe you have to, in practice and scrims, try a couple of different options out and see just what works best. Again, I think EliGE will be willing to take ropz' roles, and he probably could learn to be very good at it. But are you hamstringing the overall potential EliGE could have for the team if he was playing his more natural spots? That's the big question. Like, yeah, maybe if you put him in ropz' roles and you keep everything else the same, he does perform very well in that role. But what if he was just even greater if you kept his old roles, right? Because here's the thing. You have to wonder, here's the other question, you know, besides like this whole role conflict thing we're talking about. The other question is can FaZe overcome some of the performance issues that Rain and broky had throughout the course of the year? Look, I get broky is technically a high-end top 20 player of the year according to HLTV, but I'm going to tell you what, a lot of that was you know, loaded very heavily on the first like 6 lands of the year, and then maybe 1 or 2 lands in the middle of the year, like EPL Season 20, for example, in Rio, and then what he did in the Shanghai playoffs. There was a lot of gaps there where broky was struggling big time performance-wise. I'm just being honest, okay? And then, look, Rain, yeah, his overall entry stats for the year were pretty good. He was obviously balling out of fucking control in Shanghai. But I tell you what, if you give EliGE Rain's roles, EliGE is going to be a star rifler in those roles, whereas Rain is maybe at times just going to be average. That's just the cold, hard facts. And look, there's been so many times where I thought they should just bench Rain and bring in a stronger entry rifler. They should just bench Rain, bring in a stronger entry rifler. Bring in a strong European entry rifler. Bring in, you know, EliGE, like, you know, something wild like that. But then every time I feel that way, all of a sudden Rain turns around and like has a banger performance that makes you second guess yourself. And he's done that so many times throughout the year. It's kind of wild. So I don't know. I really don't know what you do. Like, I still have a ton of faith in Kerrigan as a leader. I think if anybody can get the most out of EliGE, it certainly will be him. He's proven it time and time again that he can lead international teams and develop players. And EliGE is already so developed that I think all he could do is just polish the edges. He doesn't have to do a whole lot. Also, if there's ever going to be a leader that EliGE is going to respect and get along with, it's going to be Kerrigan. Dude's a fucking legend. So, obviously, from that regard, you're great. I think Frozen's fine. You know, I don't really think you got to budge with that too much. But again, I am a little bit concerned about Rain and his overall performance on average, not just having these bursts of great moments, but being able to carry it through an entire season. And then I am still a little bit concerned about broky, to be honest, because had he not have had that crazy resurgence in the Shanghai playoffs, I think a lot of people would have a different take about broky's year. It would have been very top heavy for the first half of the year, and the second half of the year would not have looked as great to a lot of people. I think that major playoff really saved him. Again, he had a couple other events late in the year that were good. I mentioned Rio and EPL already, but he had some gaps where he wasn't nearly as strong. So those are the concerns I have. You know, I have concerns about how they're going to figure out these roles. I have concerns about if they're going to be able to maximize EliGE's output while still keeping people like Rain and Frozen comfortable. And then I'm concerned about, you know, one of the biggest takes about complexity was that EliGE didn't have a strong enough supporting cast. Now, look, I think already just with Frozen alone, You have a stronger supporting cast member for EliGE right there. I think already you have an IGL upgrade. That's no knock to JT, but I mean, Kerrigan, come on. Come on. What are we doing at that point? You know what I mean. So already better supporting cast in those regards. Again, I think Rain can be good, can have a high ceiling. Same with broky, but can they do it consistently, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not really sure how that's going to play out, but let me tell you what, I can't fucking wait to watch and find out, because this is so incredibly cool. And I wish everyone the best on this, and I hope it works out, because if it does, if this clicks, and if FaZe can get back to being a true top 5 contender consistently, all of a sudden the whole scene gets incredible, because you have Na'Vi, who I think are still going to be great despite their shortcomings at the end of the year. I think Vitality with ropz, that should solve their issues of not being a real team and basically be a 1-for-1 replacement for Spinks for the most part. That will still keep Vitality strong. So you're going to have them. Obviously, I think G2 is still going to be strong. If the whole rumor happens with Heavy God joining for Nico, I think that they still have a load of talent, that even if they have some shortcomings, you know, tactically at times for my liking, they're still going to have loads of talent. And then Mouse Sports, if they're able to keep Jimmy and keep that 5 going, they're still going to be a strong, you know, top 5 competitor. You got Mongols sitting out there who were incredible. You have Falcons, who are now the heroic core, plus Nico for Nerds for the most part, and then Magus for Shush. They're still going to be fucking strong, in my opinion. And then obviously, you got Spirit, who just won the major and are themselves definitely a top 5 team in the world. So things get spicy all of a sudden. Things get great. The parity continues, and I'm down for it. So let me know what you folks think in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, all that jazz. It does a lot. I really appreciate it. And I'll catch you on the next one.